Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those on the West Coast. Again, my name is Kristen Battista-Frazee, and I'm a marketing consultant, social worker, and author. I provide strategic marketing support to nonprofit organizations and personal brand coaching to human service professionals. In some of my prior experience, I developed marketing programs for startup tech companies, and for nonprofit mental health advocacy organizations. I'm also a freelance writer. Last year, I published a memoir with Skyhorse Publishing. I love strategic marketing and storytelling. So thank you again for having me here today to talk about personal branding. And what I just provided you really was my elevator pitch, which we will go into more detail later on in this presentation. And the elevator pitch, just to give you a little hint about the content to come in this presentation, is really the end result from a branding process that you would go through. So, and today I am going to do my best to address both personal and organizational branding, since many of the questions that came up from registrants, people asked about both topics. Both of these types of brandings really have a lot in common and are interconnected, but there are some differences that we'll explore. And as Monica mentioned in the Q&A part of our presentation, I can answer more specific questions. So diving right in. First, what is personal brand? Really, in essence, it's what people think when they see or hear your name. One of the registrants for this Lunch and Learn asked about rebranding if they have an existing brand. Well, I think the real answer is everyone really has an existing brand. Whether it was intentional or not is really another story. So technically, we can all say that we're on this journey to rebrand, and it's really very much about cultivating and shaping people's perception. Interestingly, a couple months ago, I read an article in Forbes that quoted that 92% of children have a digital footprint on the internet, and this really just goes to show you online has a huge presence with shaping your brand. Everyone lives online today, so that's just something to keep in mind as we go through some of this content. So, but for today, I'm going to just walk through some evaluation steps for readjusting and cultivating your brand. And just keep in mind, your brand is really always evolving, just as you are as a person. And again, it's just shaping what people's image is of you when they hear your name. So even while we're talking right now, I would just encourage you, if you want to Google your name and just kind of see what comes up, it kind of will give you an inkling as to what your web presence is right now. And as you go through this presentation, you can even start thinking about, you know, how do I want to differentiate myself? What things might I want to change about what comes up when someone might Google my name? So let's talk a little bit about the differences between personal and organizational brand. As I mentioned, they're different but similar as well. The best way you can think about a personal brand, it's an individual, about really who you are as a person, professionally and personally, and how you strike the right balance between those two things when you're presenting yourself to the world. An organizational brand is really created by purposeful marketing campaigns around a product or a service. And another way to think about it is a personal brand is really naturally occurring and comes through more authentic action. It's created by individuals who are capable of making decisions, and really a product or a service from the outgrowth of an organizational brand really has to be directed by people to inspire those types of feelings. The main commonalities of both a personal and an organizational brand is really the who and what's done and delivered. So the who of a personal brand is just who you are as a person. The who of an organization is really all of the people who work at an organization or within an entity, and probably the customers or consumers that that organization is serving. The what's done and delivered, again, I'm switching back to the individual. It's, for example, if an individual is providing counseling or delivering creative problem solving to an employer, or say you offer a really great educational credential to get a job done, that's really the who, the what gets done and what's delivered from you as an individual. For an organization, they deliver whole sets of services and products on a larger scale. For example, say it was like a supportive housing program, which employs a staff of people that offers those services. Another way I thought about trying to explain the differences, it's really a micro versus macro branding continuum, and think of that as you would in social work practice on that scale of people who work on a very individual level to those who work on a larger scale. Both types of brands really, you're vetting, the steps for really vetting a brand is trying to discover all those tangible and intangible qualities that make up the brand. Things like reputation, goals, value plays a role. And in some cases, a person can really become the organizational brand. The two are so closely aligned, it's very hard to differentiate the two. Now, for example, Oprah. Everybody knows Oprah. Everyone knows her network. She's closely aligned with the product and who she is as a person. And there are things that you think of immediately when you think of her name and her network. So serves humanity, groundbreaker, inspirational. Other people I can think of who fall into this category, maybe Martha Stewart, Richard Branson, I guess you could say Donald Trump. Not that I want to get political, but we all know like he has an evolving brand right now, and his organization is very aligned with who he is. On the organizational side, Target. They have a very well-crafted brand that's representing certain things. The tagline is very well known: expect more, pay less. Target, cheap chic. They have really catchy commercials during the holiday season. We're all probably spending a lot of time in Target this month. But really, it's the people who work at Target who are embodying and directing how you feel about this brand. So getting into the discovery phase for brand. And I guess I'd like to just take 1 second and pause to see if anyone has any questions. Since this is supposed to be interactive, I can burn through a bunch of content, but if people have questions, I just wanted to give them the opportunity to ask. Maybe one or two. We have time to take maybe 1 or 2 questions.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Is creating a personal website, do you think that's beneficial to building your personal brand?
I do, very much. And I am going to get into that much later in the presentation, and you'll see, I'll explain clearly why that's the case.
Okay.
Let's take one more question, and then I'll move on, if anyone has a question. All right, everyone's quiet, so I'm just going to move ahead. So for an organization or person to present a cohesive brand, it really helps to do some brand discovery. You need to really think about what your goal is, you know, what attributes there are to your brand, strengths, challenges, passions, how you would describe your personality, thinking about your values. All of these things go into the thinking about your brand, even before you're putting together effective elevator pitches, posting on social media, and blogging. You may be doing all of those things right now, but to truly hone your brand and to make it most effective for meeting your goals, it's really important to kind of do this thinking. And it's the same for an organization too. The organization that's vetting what their strengths and challenges are, clarifying what they're passionate about, what their values stand for, those apply to an entity as well. And I really think social workers have a unique advantage in this regard. I think we all come to this profession really with a passion to help others. We have strong opinions about certain social issues and really a strong sense of who we are, especially in relation to the clients we serve. You know, once you nail down some of these important attributes, I would just suggest maybe going to, for personal branding, going to a family or a good friend or a mentor and asking them to do like a 360 assessment about what they think about how you've assessed yourself. And a really great tool that I found was helpful in doing this type of work for personal branding is a workbook that PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, has provided to their employees. It's available on the web just for anyone to download. It's a good example of how a company really encourages their employees as well to develop their personal brand, which actually really reflects well on the company too. So some key questions to ask yourself as you're in this brand discovery phase. What are your goals? Pretty simple, but does require a lot of thought. I would just suggest identifying up to 3 things you hope to accomplish in your career or for a personal project. Think of it as the first step in developing a marketing plan for yourself. I think every human services professional and social worker strives to identify and solve problems, but you know, as you already well know in your work, having a clear idea or goal or an end result really helps to get you where you're going. Next really is you have to know who your audience is. For branding purposes, I would just suggest people think about who would hire them, not so much as to who you serve in the community, although that community audience is important for purposes of professional development in your career. And if you think of tools like LinkedIn, that's really for promoting yourself professionally. You can always serve multiple audience, but categorize them as primary, secondary, tertiary. Next really is who's your competition in your profession or your space, and how do you differentiate yourself? How do you differentiate your skills against someone else? Do you have a credential that's in high demand? Or maybe it's possible that you're working with a certain population for a very long period of time and you have a certain expertise or particular knowledge. It's those types of qualities that you should be thinking about to kind of tease out to incorporate into your brand. And if you know your right target audience, those messages are really going to resonate. So, you know, the particular problem you're addressing for your target audience as well needs to be clearly connected to your strengths that you're identifying in your brand discovery. Again, if you're serving 2 separate audiences or you're trying to reach 2 separate audiences, the problem you're solving for each are going to be different. So you just have to make adjustments depending on who you're talking to. So,
Silva, San Diego Regional Center, calling in regards to the nurse.
Does someone have a question? No? Okay. I'll just keep going. So at this point, you know, as we go through the deck, you've kind of done a bit of brand discovery, and you're getting to the point where you need to kind of put this into some kind of a language or copy or statement. And the three things that I see talked about most is a value proposition, position statement, and personal brand. These things are very closely related, but they all speak to some distinction. So I will go through each of these. So a value proposition is really, it's just a statement that clarifies what's special about you, what value you're delivering, and how you solve a problem for your audience. Think of this as a very big picture and broad. And here I kind of tried to craft an example of what a value proposition would look like. It's very short, and it seems like, you know, those other slides that I went through, there's a lot of thinking that goes into finally getting to this point where you're crafting a short sentence. And in this one, I just, you know, you can read it, but I'm kind of envisioning this person who's trying to do personal brand, and that they have a set of attributes. And this one, creating independence for people with supporting housing, for people with supporting housing solutions. The next one, position statement, you're really borrowing very heavily from the values proposition. You can think of this statement as really drilling down to clarify how you're different from people who may have your same set of skills or within your space. So it adds a bit of positioning in here. So for this one, I added in-depth knowledge of supporting housing program as the positioning copy for how this fictitious person I've made up these statements for, of how you would reposition yourself. And then the last one is a personal brand statement. It's really an I statement. I've read a lot of materials that say this should be like 10 to 12 words. To be honest, every time I've tried to do it, I really couldn't get under like 20 words. I think even this one is like 21 words. But it's an I statement. Again, it's restating what you're good at, who you serve, and what you do. So I hope that clarifies. So now we're finally, you've gone through all this discovery work. We've arrived at, now you're ready to create your elevator pitch. And really the crafting of it, once you get to this point, I think it really flows pretty naturally if you've done all of that other thinking work up front. And you can really just simply think of this as an introduction about who you are, what you do, and your expertise. And the goal is to really be just concise and invite someone into a conversation. You don't need to, in your elevator pitch, share your entire resume or tell your whole life story. What's really helpful is preparing an elevator pitch ahead of time. Like say you're going to a big conference and you know you're going to be doing a lot of networking. I would just recommend writing out an elevator pitch and just practicing it aloud to see how it flows naturally. The goal is really for this just to be very natural, and your delivery of it has to be confident. You know, your body is held upright, you're looking people in the eye. And the great thing about actually putting this in writing is that you can integrate it into a website, a resume, and all of your social media. And again, going back to target audience, when you're giving your introduction, just be aware of who you're speaking to. So you know that you're saying the right things that would appeal to them. And I created a sample elevator pitch here. Again, who you are, what you do, expertise. I think the last line for success, sometimes you don't have enough time to kind of squeeze that in. But if you do, it's great to kind of have it in your back pocket. And if you're engaging someone in conversation, it will come up anyway. Some great successes that you've had in your past career, projects that you're working on currently. So it's always good just to develop that sentence anyway. Does anyone have any questions before we go on? We got a quiet bunch. Okay, I'm just going to plow ahead. So the telling your story. So you've done all this planning work. It's clear that everyone really has a unique story that brings them to human services and social work. And if you're clear about who your audience is and what you have to offer in relation to some competition, chances are you're going to attract the right type of connections and opportunities. And as you develop this narrative around your personal brand, there are going to be pros and cons to telling your story. For example, when you express viewpoints, either social, political, or otherwise, it can draw people to you or potentially turn them off. If you do the thinking and the work up front and you know your audience really well, you'll have a better sense of, and you probably instinctually know this as well, what you can say and what you can't say. And you really just have to use your best judgment. And later, this was a question that came up from registrants. We'll talk a little bit more about how to negotiate you telling your own story around your organization's brand. But again, I want to stress the good news that if it's tied to your values and taps into your strengths, it is going to lead you in the right direction to working with people who are a great fit for you. And telling your story in an authentic way can really bring you some great opportunities. For me, publishing, I learned a great deal. I met some great people, and it was really a valuable experience that I wouldn't trade. Now, there are tons of tools to do this. It's almost overwhelming how many tools are available to us nowadays to be able to tell our story and share our brand. Websites, social media, blogs, videos, presenting. You'll notice a lot of this lives online. I would say predominantly most branding activities live online nowadays. To answer one of these attendees' questions, yes, I think everybody should have a personal website that can be very short, really, just a bio, links to your social media. There's lots of free and low-cost options, Squarespace, WordPress, BrandMe. Keep in mind there are lots of ways that you can share your brand. Also, you can communicate your brand through your workplace, and even with organizations that you're affiliated, such as where you graduated from school. Does anyone have any questions?
Kristen, we do have 2 additional questions that were typed.
Okay.
The first is, what do you think about leading an elevator pitch with what your passions are instead of what it is you do?
I think that's a very good strategy, and I think it does depend on your your audience too. Even though you're vocalizing what your passions are, I do feel like it needs to be connected to depending on the venue that you're in. Like if you're at a workplace conference, then I think whatever your passions are do need to be connected to some of the work that you do. And I think, especially for social workers, that's probably an easy connection to make.
And I've heard that as well before, so it sounds like a good strategy. Another question we received was, part of your unique story is the perceptions that other professionals have through previous experience. How do you get an accurate impression of this?
How do they, through other people?
Yes.
Is that, you know, there's just so much that you can control about other people's perceptions about you. I just think if people go through their career and they're interacting online and in person in a way that's reflective of the hard work that they do and just close to their authentic selves, that you're probably in good shape, that you've built a reputation during time, that most people are going to have a good perception of you. But that's a long-term strategy that you always have to be thinking about in your mind. And also, there is a certain amount of this is where you can't control what everybody thinks about you. The only thing that you can control really is how you're conducting yourself online, how you're conducting yourself in your everyday work. And if you're doing a great job at that, you should not have any problem in the way people perceive you. Obviously, the hardworking, great things that you have to offer will just shine through.
Kristen, and you did mention earlier that if you wanted to see what your colleagues thought of you, you mentioned to ask them to survey you, or was there a certain format or strategy you mentioned so that you can learn what your impression is?
You could, if you were sending a document that you created that detailed all of your brand discovery, you could make it a more formalized format and put it in SurveyMonkey or another web-based survey tool, or it could be something informally done where you're writing down your thoughts in a Word document and you email it to maybe 3 of your closest friends and just say, hey, I'm trying to do some readjustment on my brand, my personal brand. What do you think about these things that I've assessed about myself? So it could be formal or informal.
Okay, and please type your questions. We will have additional time for Q&A at the end of the presentation.
Okay, so moving on about the promotion of your brand. You've spent time hopefully developing your narrative, and you well understand all your attributes. You've gotten on social media, you have your profiles set up, but now what? Someone asked, one of the registrants asked, how do I promote my brand without sounding like a know-it-all and appearing to be self-centered? And I actually hear this a lot from social workers, and I really think it's because we're so used to serving others and having our attention focused outward. But I just want to stress, I really think it's important that we can all be humble yet still promote our experiences and skills. And I think a good way to think about it is that you're really sharing your experiences and expertises that are going to make a difference in helping others. So try not to be shy about it. I understand why some people are shy about it. I myself feel that way sometimes. It's hard to kind of put yourself out there, but it's very important to do so. So now is the time to kind of get out there. It's your chance to engage with like-minded professionals and find mentors and share articles. I can just share a couple of things that I do that I really enjoy. I have to give a shout out to the macro SW chats. I'm a part of the core group that does these chats bi-monthly every Thursday at 9 p.m. And also the network was a founding member of these chats. And really, it's an excellent way to meet people and learn new things, and they learn about you and your expertise. It's great, a great place to collaborate. If you want to discover these types of chats, there's a site called Twubs. It's twubs.com, and it's a place where you can search by topic and find all kinds of tweet chats that are going on. And there's lots of tweet chats that happen within the social workspace too. But the one thing I have to stress about promoting your brand, it's really all about leveraging good content. So maybe gossiping about neighbors, or when you're doing your laundry might not be the best thing, because really you have to remember every post, every blog should really tie to your values and tie to showing your strengths and what you're really good at and what you're passionate about. And much of this really does boil down to being authentic too. You don't want to come off as unbelievable, nor do you even have to act in a way that people expect. You just want to act and be who you are. But by doing this, it will naturally differentiate you from other people, and you'll be able to more genuinely connect with others. And just a quick word of advice: just think before you post or tweet, and also just know that credibility is really everything. So the high quality of your content is really important. So I hope this slide answers two questions that were posed. One was, to what extent should I use social media? And I would say as often as you can. And the other question or statement was, if I lack confidence, how do I build a personal brand? And I think a lot of people feel this way. If you undertake the thinking steps in the discovery process, you will gain that confidence. And the more you are kind of out there trying to do this, it does become much easier. But it did make me think of people who feel like maybe they're a little bit of a social media introvert. And I thought through some steps that might make it easier for you to engage online. And the first is, if you're posting about issues you care about, as an expert and as a social worker, you really have a lot to say about many injustices and things that are going on in the world. Sometimes it's easier just to post a video or a picture. Really, those kind of images speak volumes. I read recently 90% of information is transmitted to the brain visually, and it's processed 60,000 times faster than text, which I found totally intriguing. And yet, if I think about the way I learn, I gravitate to pictures and video. And if you've noticed, even online, video is becoming a very big deal. If you're feeling really brave, you can use an app called Periscope, which is connected to your Twitter account. And it's a live streaming app that lets you broadcast things live on the spot through your phone. For me, I don't really like being in front of the camera, but I like, if I go to an event, that I can film it and provide some commentary and share it with some of my followers on Twitter. I think when you're online and you're following people you like and organizations that share your values, it keeps you more engaged and more likely to share content. So really don't follow anyone or like pages that you think you should. Just do it because you're really genuinely interested. Also, finding influencers and people who you feel like are your key audience, it would be important. If there's an author you really like, Brene Brown is great. She's become very well known. Follow her. They have, these thought leaders have some great content to share that you can then share to the people that you're communicating with online. And I think the last thing, and I feel like it's the most important, I feel like it makes it feel more doable for people, that if you just don't feel like being online some days, that's okay. Just be okay with that. I used to believe that I was unproductive if I wasn't posting, sharing constantly online, but to be honest, that gets very draining. So I kind of let go of that notion, and I decided, well, I'm just going to post, what I really like and what I want to share with my followers. So, your day-to-day life is very busy. You can't spend hours posting content online. We all need a break from the constant stimulation. So as much as this presentation is about yes, 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 you need to be online and in social media, just know that, you can do it at your own pace as well for it still to be effective. We had a registrant from Uganda that asked a question about if the style of clothing is reflected in personal branding. And I have to say, yes, it does make a difference. How you look when you enter a room or a workplace makes a statement. You want to dress professionally, polished, use it as an opportunity to show your personality and your style. Any questions so far? Are we all good? We got any questions?
Kristen, I had a question within an organizational context. So what are strategies that you could advise your board of directors or staff to help us improve our branding and to improve the specific target market that we're seeking to do outreach to? Especially if a board, for example, isn't as tech savvy, what would you recommend?
This sounds familiar to a specific question that was asked. So let me jump down to, it's actually in this next slide that I have up. So now actually, let me just flip to it right now. It's a couple slides ahead. That's a hard question to answer because I don't know a lot about the organization that needs to be making this change. I would say I would always rely back on the brand discovery, just making sure the organization has correctly identified what the problem it is that they're trying to solve, and they have a clear idea of who they're serving. Also, based on this thinking, a lot would have to go into refining website copy, blogging, savvy use of social media, but this really just scratches the surface. It's all about, for the organization, really trying to figure out their brand personality, who they are as an organization, and having all of that thinking to be translated within the tools of telling, like all the places where you're online, you're in presentations, you're meeting with colleagues, all of that has to be cohesively thought through. And that's a whole process that an organization needs to go through and come to an agreement on as to how all the tone and the personality of an organization really needs to come through. I hope that answered.
It did, thank you.
All right, so there were a lot of questions that people asked that had a lot to do with organizational brand, and it kind of fell into three buckets. So the recruitment of employees, and how you leverage employees as brand ambassadors, and negotiating around an organizational brand. It's a lot to squeeze into this slide, but I thought I would give it a shot. So The first one about, someone asked specifically how to recruit and keep high-performing employees. And really, for an organization, you can consider employees and prospective employees as really a secondary audience. And in this case, you need to discover the goals, who the other employer competitors are in your community, what problems are you solving for your employees or prospective employees that would make them want to come to work for you versus somewhere else. For example, if your organization is flexible about working from home, then this solves a big time constraint or a commuting problem for them, and they may choose to work with you rather than go to another employer. So this actually has a name. It's called employer brand, and it's something that's disseminated within an HR function of your organization. So if you not every organization has an HR department. Sometimes it's just one person, but it's something that you can think about in terms of when you're communicating with that audience. How are you really portraying the organization to make it enticing for them to want to work for you rather than somewhere else? And that topic could be a whole entire presentation. There's a lot of material out there about this very issue. The next thing that touched upon some of the questions asked was how to leverage employees as brand ambassadors. And earlier in the presentation, I talked a little bit about PricewaterhouseCoopers, who has some excellent materials. They very much view their employees as brand ambassadors, and a lot of companies are really moving in that direction, and they've come up with very robust social media policies, and they do a lot to help their employees develop their brand. What they're trying to also combat against is, for people who don't carry the values of the company or the organization, they don't want them doing inappropriate things online that will reflect poorly on them. It could be seen as a liability for the company, and it's obviously a liability for people. You might have heard stories in the media about people who get fired because they're posting outrageous things online. It's in that vein that I think companies and organizations are becoming more sensitive, and they're also becoming more savvy about how to leverage your great employees as ambassadors. So tight social media policies. I don't know if you're thinking about how you're developing your own brand. I don't know if your organization has a social media policy. I would say it could be a nice conversation to prompt them to think about developing one. It would really do the organization a lot of good, and even being able to use their employees to promote what they do. The last one about how to negotiate around your organization's brand, it's really important to note that if you want to stay employed, you really can't be advocating on a topic that directly contradicts your employer's brand or mission. But, in many cases, you would not be working for an organization that really goes against your values. So that's good news. But there's a tremendous overlap between your personal brand and that of your organization. And, I really see it as a positive. You can leverage the work that you're doing for your employer to enhance your own personal brand. On the flip side, as we already talked about, organizations can really benefit to you having a strong brand. So overall, I think the synergies work in both parties' favor. I would just recommend, overall, for all of these topics, that organizations come up with a social media policy to guide employees about what's acceptable, not acceptable, and there is an extra layer if you are clinicians and an organization that provides a lot of counseling and clinical services, a social media policy, and there is, again, this could be a whole other presentation around special considerations that clinicians need to take in working on social media. So things need to be discussed upfront with clients about, you know, as a clinician, I am not going to friend or follow you, and this will be understood at the beginning of the clinical relationship. And as the client, you need to understand if you like or follow me or my organization, this could compromise your confidentiality. I would recommend Dr. Keely Holmes, K-O-L-M-E-S, on her website. She has excellent resources for organizations and private practices who are using social media and technology. Also, in my work with New Social Worker magazine and some of the articles that I've written for the Your Social Work brand personal branding column, I discovered NASW, they're updating their code of ethics to better incorporate the use of technology and social media in practice. NASW is also working with ASWB and CSWE to update a brief on standards and technology. That this is a very small part of that. So I think there's going to be more guidance from these advocacy and membership organizations within the social work profession that could give us some better guidance in this area. But last thing, and I kind of touched on it earlier in the presentation, this really does come down to judgment, your own personal judgment, to not alienate your core audience. But again, you will be fine as long as you're speaking to your values, your strengths. The stars will align in that regard. Okay. Are there any questions? Because I have specific questions that I pulled off the registration sheet that I thought I could just go through and answer specifically.
Kristen, and before you launch into the questions, I just wanted to take this opportunity to share that a great opportunity to promote your brand is to submit for the network's Monday Morning Manager blog. This blog provides you with the opportunity to share your social work story, and it also gives you visibility to the entire network audience by email, website, and social media. So we will also send that application link shortly after the webinar.
Awesome. And I did that too. I was a Monday Morning Manager. I filled out one of those things, and it was really great. So, and it was actually fun to write. So I would definitely recommend people do it as well. Okay, any questions so far besides what is visible on the deck? Okay, I'm just going to launch in. Somebody asked, one of the registrants asked, what are best practices for social workers to promote their skill sets using platforms such as LinkedIn? Off the top of my head, I really think best practices is just really being knowledgeable about the content you post and providing high quality content and commentary. Being respectful in your interactions, being yourself. You know, I think, you know, if you have clients that you're working with, that's a special consideration of how you impact them, and how that would be negotiated. So for clinicians, I think it's really specific. As I mentioned regarding the social media policy that some organizations or private practices have when it comes to dealing with your clients. Specific tactics, for LinkedIn specifically, I would just suggest really spending a good amount of time writing a good LinkedIn summary, which is the top part of your profile that allows people to add into their profile, maybe a sentence or two, even longer, of how they describe their experiences. Also, LinkedIn has some great tools like SlideShare, and a way to post articles right into your profile. So those are just a couple of things that I would recommend. For the second one, somebody asked, what do you recommend offering to social work students and emerging professionals who have limited experience? And I have to say, I don't necessarily think you have to have tons of experience to brand yourself really well. It's more of a matter of making sure you're clear about your goals and what kind of work you want to do, and just clearly articulating and vocalizing that, what your passions are aligned with the values that you have regarding the work that you want to undertake. And I would say younger professionals may even have a leg up on some professionals who might not be as savvy with the use of social media. Young professionals and students may have a greater opportunity to network and find mentors. So really, anybody, whether you're young or a seasoned professional, if you need to round out your experience, everybody has to do that. They have to either decide they're going to get a credential or go back to school, or if you want to, do something new, you have to volunteer and maybe kind of earn that experience as a way to make that transition. So the third one, I think I sort of answered before. It was the three specific strategies in relation to the board question. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that one and just go down to number 4 about how social workers can really avoid being seen as working only with one type of population. And the great thing about having a social work degree is it provides us a great skill-based skill set where we can decide to do lots of different things. I would just say any individual who is wanting to make a transition of any sort, they have to do a bit of translation work on their own in identifying what skill sets they have. And this could go back to a lot of the brand discovery stuff that we talked about earlier. So it's what types of skills can translate to working with a new audience or working in a new type of job. If you can pull out what those commonalities are in the exercises to identify, strengths and challenges, you'll do well in trying to make the transition to that new job. For example, say you've been a direct clinician for a long period of time, but you want to, transition to doing some policy work. Well, your knowledge of that target audience that you've been working with, say, for X number of years, you can make a case for transitioning to do policy work that directly affects this target audience that you have a great deal of knowledge and expertise in serving. So that could be just one example as to how you kind of tease through your experience to find those common threads. You always have to consider what skills you might not have, and as we just talked about in the last question, you have to decide, do you need more volunteer work, do you need further education to really gain that experience to move into some kind of a new role. So now we have a chance to take more questions if there are any. Oh gosh, we've run the whole hour. So if anyone has any questions, I'll send this deck out to folks afterwards with a list of articles, resource articles that I've collected over a period of time that you might find helpful. Also, you can always check out the personal branding blog that I do on the New Social Worker magazine, and if you're on Twitter, log into the hashtag, ask me questions. it's been, I hope, a great resource for the profession as they think about personal branding.
Yes, and thank you so much, Kristen, for providing this presentation. And thank you all for joining. Take care and enjoy the holidays as well.